the idea that there's this famous minhag, this custom to have milky foods on Shavuos. I'm very interested. I'm very interested during the course of the next few minutes to hear. Maybe we'll get a chance to hear what the Dutch minhagim are. The Dutch minhagim are always very interesting and different to where I come from. Even though things where I come from is also a European Yekisher background, but still the Dutch minhagim sometimes surprise me. But we're going to talk about the various minhagim. There's different customs, how people do this milky meal, when they do it, how they do it. And there's also various halachic issues. There's various reasons behind the minhag that we'll discover, the different ideas, and which are very fascinating to look into. And there's also various halachic difficulties with the minhag that we're going to see, and we're going to try and work out, try and grapple with the halachic difficulties and how we overcome each one of those difficulties. So there'll be a bit of minhag, there'll be a bit of drush. We'll explore the ideas behind the minhagim, behind the customs, and there'll also be some halacha. We're going to look into the halachic sugya, the subject of milk and meat together, to try and grapple with some of the halachic difficulties that might come up with eating milky on Shavuos. I saw though that Rav Padwa spoke about milk yesterday. Is that correct?
No, this morning.
This morning. Yeah, so it's as correct. So I got wrong when he was supposed to be speaking. So did he speak about did he speak specifically about kashrus of milk, or did he also speak about milk and meat?
No, he speak more his business from milk. For the factories.
Okay, fine. So I won't then be competing with what he had to say.
No.
And you can be assured that I don't have any business interests in this one. But I don't have any kashrus to sell. But okay, we'll make a start. Now, the truth is that the custom to eat milky on Shavuos is not mentioned in the Gemara, as far as I'm aware. It's not mentioned in the Midrashic text. It's not such an old custom like some of the customs that we have. Considering that some customs we have on Seder night are really, really old, the custom to eat milk on Shavuos is much later. It is mentioned in Rabbeinu Avigdor, who, if I'm not mistaken, was a late Rishon, one of the Rishonim in medieval commentators. But generally, we don't find it almost until we get to the times of the Shulchan Aruch and his contemporaries, the people who lived at the time of the Shulchan Aruch. So there we find the Maharil. He speaks about this minhag. The Maharil is a source for very early minhagim. The Ramah, who wrote his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, quotes often the Maharil. And the Maharil is a good early source of different customs. The Maharil says that they used to have a custom to eat something. He says some funny name, which I imagine was a kind of blintz, like a cheese blintz that they used to eat on Shavuot. Now, that's pretty much no one really goes into it. And the Moshe Isserles in his gloss to Hilchos Shavuos on Shulchan Aruch, the Shulchan Aruch itself makes no mention of this minhag. And the Ramah says that there's a minhag to eat cheesy foods on Shavuos. So this is one of the first sources that we have for the custom to eat early cheesy foods is from the Ramah, who's obviously quoting earlier people. Now, what's the idea behind this? Well, let's have a look at the reasons for the minhag. There's various ideas given in some of the halachic writings. One of the earliest ideas we find is the Kol Boy. The Kol Boy was a book that literally means Kol Boy, everything in it, Kol Boy. And the Kol Boy basically writes the source and the reasons for loads and loads of different customs. And he says that the simple explanation why we have on Shavuos cheesy food, milky foods, is because the Pasuk, the verse in Shir Hashirim, Song of Songs, says, Devash v'chalav tachat l'shonech, honey and milk under your tongue. And the commentators explain that this honey and milk is a reference to Torah. Honey and milk, the Torah is as sweet as honey and milk under your tongue. In other words, the words of our mouth should be like honey and milk. Now, many people are familiar with the custom that when children first start, there's some places, like in Israel, they do this a lot, and when children first start attending their cheder, their school, when they go in for their first day, when they're 3, even if they don't really start, they go in at the age of 3 when they get their kapel and the sitzis, the yamuka, and the Rebbe, the cheder Rebbe takes them in and he puts a laminated page of aleph base of the Hebrew alphabet, and he puts honey all over it, and they lick the honey off the aleph base, and it's this beautiful symbolic act that should always be seared in the child's memory, that the words of the Torah, the words of the aleph base are like honey, are as sweet as honey. So that custom we're more familiar with. But cholol, milk, is the time we express that is on Shavuos. When we receive the Torah, we express this idea that the Torah is as sweet as milk. Now it's interesting because honey isn't so. The honey is sweet, and milk. What's special about milk? In other words, we understand why the Torah is compared to honey, because we're supposed to see the Torah as a sweet, something that's delicious, that's tasty. But why milk? So I saw that one of the commentators, the Malvim, writes something very interesting. He says that honey and milk, and we'll get to this perhaps much later on. We'll revisit this a bit, maybe if we get time at the end of the shiur. But honey and milk have one similarity. They're both produced. They're natural fluids that are produced from within the body of a creature. In other words, honey. How does a bee produce honey? Honey is created. The bee takes the pollen and produces it within his stomach. Secretes. He lets out honey. So honey is a food. It's an edible food that we can eat. That actually an animal created inside it. And it's interesting because it's not like meat. It's not like we're eating the flesh of the animal. We're eating something that the animal secreted. In fact, it's fascinating that the Gemara, in fact, discusses, and this is for a completely separate occasion, the Gemara discusses how it's permitted, in fact, to eat honey if honey is something that comes from a non-kosher animal. And we normally have a principle that anything that comes from a non-kosher animal, so a food that comes from a non-kosher animal is not kosher to eat. And yet we see, like milk of a camel is not kosher because it's the milk of a non-kosher animal. And yet honey is. That's a separate thing. But the bee secretes the honey from itself. Milk is also such a substance. Milk is ultimately that within the nutrients of the animal, any animal that provides milk, it channels the milk from the foods and it creates this edible substance called milk. And both of these things are taken out of the animal body and they become edible for human beings. So the Malbim says that there's a lesson there. There's something very powerful there. That when we view these animals that secrete something, we see there's an animal body. There's just a piece of cow. There's an animal body, and the animal body is secreting something that's better, almost that's higher than itself. It's secreting something from within itself that's edible for human beings. The Torah is the same thing. The Torah is, why is the Torah compared to honey and milk? Because the Torah gives human beings the ability to transform within ourselves, transform from being a mere animal, from being just a body of flesh and bone, and transforming into something more than that. We can transform into something that's beautiful and sweet and edible. In other words, we're not eating ourselves, of course, but we're transforming ourselves from, like the bee transforms the honey, like into milk, we transform our physical bodies through the Torah, through living with the Torah in the mitzvahs. That's a nice idea why Torah and mitzvahs are compared to honey and milk. That's one idea. The Ramah himself, Moshe Isserles himself, has an interesting idea that he proposes from his own idea. He says that perhaps the reason why we eat milk on Shavuos is because nearly, I'll read it out to you, nearly it seems to me the reason is on Seder night, if we recall, it wasn't so long ago, just over 6 weeks ago, we put on the Seder plate in the middle of the table, we put two foods that are a remembrance or a reminder of past things. We put on the zrah, the shank bone or the wing, a roasted bone that reminds us of the Korban Pesach, of the Pesach sacrifice. And we also put on the beitza, the egg. The egg reminds us of the Korban Chagiga, of a different one of the sacrifices that was brought every Yom Tov, every festival in the temple times. But the egg is symbolic of mourning. It's symbolic of we've lost the Beit HaMikdash. There's various reasons given for the egg. So the Ramah says that the same idea, why we have two foods there, we have here two things. We have sometimes on Shavuos meat and sometimes on Shavuos milk to remind us of the two showbreads, the Shtei HaLechem. In temple times, the korban, there was a special korban, a special offering for Shavuos, which was two showbreads. It was two lechem upon it, was two showbreads. So the Ramah, that's all the Ramah says. He says that these two, eating meat and eating milk, is symbolic of the two showbreads, in the same way that we have two symbolic foods at the Seder table. So many of the Achronim and many of the commentators say that that doesn't really flow. It doesn't, there's something missing in the understanding. What's the connection between meat and milk? On Pesach, the connection is obvious. The connection on Pesach is very simple. We have a shank bone to remind us of the Korban Pesach, and another roasted item, which actually in Gemara times was another roasted piece of meat, that reminded us of a different offering of the Kol Chagiga. But here, how does milk and meat remind us of the two showbreads? So the Pri Chodosh says, one of the commentators says it's unusual explanation, but the Mishnah Berurah and other Achronim explain that actually it's quite insightful of the Ramah, because there's a halacha in Shulchan Aruch that says that if a person has a meaty meal and he uses a loaf of bread, he shouldn't use the same loaf of bread in a milky meal. Now today, we'll explain it's not so relevant today, but in the old days, people wouldn't use cutlery, they didn't have accessibility to cutlery in the way they do today. And often people would literally take from the loaf, they didn't have nice sliced bread that comes sliced in a machine in a packet, they take from the loaf and then hold it with their hand and cut with the knife, sometimes like we do on Shavuos. As a result, if you're eating a meaty meal, and you're not eating a meaty meal with knives and forks and spoons in the manner that we do today, then it's likely that you would touch the bread with your meaty hands and smear the substance of meat over the bread. You then wouldn't be able to take that same loaf of bread and use it with a milky meal, because you'd be eating bread that has meat on it, you'd be eating meat and milk. So by eating two different foods, meat and milk, by default, we end up it being put in a situation where we have to use two loaves of bread. And that's symbolic of the two loaves of showbread that they had in the temple times on Shavuos, the two lechem apanim, the showbreads. Because the meat and the milk they bring about the need for two loaves of bread. And as a result, there's quite an obvious connection between having a meat meal, having meat and milk, and the connection between two loaves of bread. But it's fascinating because we'll see soon that there's various customs how to eat meat and milk. And some people just do it in completely separate meals. In other words, one meal they have a meaty meal and one meal a milky meal. Others have the custom to have it within the same meal. They start off with milk and then they eat meat, or in Holland perhaps vice versa. And as a result, the people, consequently, the Ramah was clearly, according to this explanation, the Ramah was clearly going with those people his custom must be to eat within one meal, meat and milk. And therefore he says there's a necessity for two different loaves of bread. Whereas normally you might use one loaf of bread for the whole meal, the Ramah would say that in such a meal there would be a need for two loaves of bread. And thus on the table would be this symbolic two loaves of bread that represent the shtei halechem, the two showbreads.
Can I ask you something in regards to what you just said?
Yeah.
Because as far as I have learned, there must be some substantial amount of time between meals of meat and milk, which is then differs regarding to the minchags, to certain minchags. How can you then eat the same within the same meal?
Meals, yeah. Right.
Yeah. Let's say you have one meal and in the same time, and okay, two loaves of bread makes sense, but there must be some substantial amount of time within this kind of meals, like some even 6 hours.
Right, very good, excellent. We'll explore. We're going to explore this in the second part soon. We're going to get to this, the halachic problems, like you mentioned, with meat and milk and how we get around them. We'll have a look at it. We'll go a bit in depth there. We'll have a look. It'll be a bit halachic and technical, but hopefully then you'll appreciate it now that you've asked that question. I hope everyone else too. So that's another idea. There's another idea brought down for the meat and milk minhag that the Magen Avraham says that the 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuot are representative or symbolic of the 7 clean days that a woman who has menstrual impurity, the Torah defines that a woman who has menstrual impurity has 7 clean days before she can go and toivel, before she does tefillah in the mikvah. So these 7, what happens in these 7 days? So there's an interesting Gemara that says that the Gemara perhaps has some scientific basis, but the Gemara says that we notice that when a woman is feeding her child, when she's suckling her young, when she's nursing her young after birth, then in many cases, today less so, but at least in theory, her menstrual blood, her flow of menstrual blood stops, and instead there's an availability of milk to feed the child. So the Gemara says that it's as if the blood stops, dries up, and becomes milk. The blood flow in her body becomes milk instead. That's how the Gemara looks at the concept of a woman who no longer has menstrual flow because she's feeding. So if the 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuos can be compared to the 7 weeks where the 7 days of purity, and it's clear the comparison because we went, so to speak, from this sort of impurity of being in the most low and impure country in the ancient world, Egypt, a world of idolatry and a world where they were steeped in magical cults and mysticism and witchcraft. And we went from that to being a holy nation, to being the nation of Israel. So we need a purification process. And that purification process is almost, so to speak, where the impure blood dries up and gives way to milk, to the life flow, to the life-providing energy of milk. So on Shavuos, now that we've got to that perfect pure stage where we finished with sort of the impure blood and we're ready to, we only got milk left, so we eat milk on Shavuos. That's a beautiful idea that's mentioned. And then we'll leave you with one more idea. The Mishnah Berurah has a fascinating idea that he says that, and this is an interesting one. It has a halakhic ramification as well later on. The Mishnah Berurah says that when the Jewish nation received the Torah, this was the first time in their racial history, in their history as a nation, that from that moment on, they were no longer allowed to eat meat without having done shchita, ritual slaughter, melicha, salting the meat, nikkur, taking out various parts of the fats that are forbidden, and all the intricacies and all the difficulties that are involved in eating meat. So what did they do? The moment after they received the Torah, they didn't know what to do. They couldn't eat meat because it would take time. They had to prepare knives and sharpen them and learn the laws. It wasn't just something that you sort of can catch on to 1, 2, 3, and they're hungry and they need their breakfast. So what did they do? They ate milky products, it says, the Mishnah Berurah suggests. They ate milky products. So to commemorate that, every year on Shavuos, we eat milky products. We eat milk products because to commemorate how that very first Shavuot morning, when the Jews received the Torah 3,500 years ago, they couldn't eat meat, they had to eat milk. And that's another idea why today we have this custom of eating milk. Okay, so when do we do it? So that's some ideas behind the custom. How is it done? So now we're going to get into the various customs of how it's done. Some people, and here I'm interested to hear how it's done in Holland. Some people, and this was almost positive was the custom in Germany, and perhaps it's the custom here as well. They had a milky meal by night. The Yom Tov
by night, yes.
By night.
By night, and sometimes in the afternoon also.
In the afternoon also.
Yes.
But as well as
the most is by night.
Most do it by night. Okay. So the custom
is now very late.
Yeah.
That is the problem.
Yeah, it's very late. This is Amsterdam. Yeah. If we lived in Israel, it wouldn't be so late.
Normally, for a few years we had now summertime. It was 1 hour earlier.
Oh, wow, right. Yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
Now to eat a whole meal at 11 o'clock, I don't know.
although they do say that the benefit of living in Amsterdam is that those who learn all Shavuos night, they don't have very long to go after they finish the meal.
Yeah.
Okay. So some people, the custom in Germany and in Holland apparently was to eat a milky meal by night. Now, this is very much debated amongst the commentators. And of course, I'm not here at all. This is what I do. So before anyone thinks I'm attacking the custom, I do the same thing myself. This is what my family do and what I will be doing for Ezrat Hashem this year. But there's various difficulties among the commentators. Mainly the problem that they discuss is that there's two ideas. Number one is a general problem that we find generally that there's a mitzvah to have Simchas Yom Tov, to enjoy the Yom Tov meals. And many of the commentators, and this is a general problem, it's not specifically located to the night meal, it's a general problem. Many of the Achronim, other commentators, suggest that how did they enjoy Yom Tov in the temple times? They enjoyed it by having the meat of the offerings. They were commanded to bring a chagiga, bring an offering every Yom Tov. Everyone would be Ola Regel. They would go up to Yerushalayim, the Pilgrim Festival, all 3 of the Pilgrim Festivals, and then they would offer up a korban, and they would sit with their families and eat the meat of the korban. And what would they drink? They would drink wine. Wine, of course, was the main drink that they had in those days. But also wine, yayin yisamach levav enosh, wine makes a person happy, makes a person content. So many of the Achronim say that even today, where we don't have the temple, the mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov, the mitzvah to enjoy Yom Tov, which is definitely a Torah mitzvah. The Torah says, "V'samachta b'chagecha," you shall rejoice on your festival. Enjoy your festival. This
What's happened?
only specifically. Why do I say it? Is my internet still on?
Okay, go ahead. I don't know what's happened.
I don't know, it's gone a bit shaky, my internet. Can you hear me still?
Okay, but it's okay.
Yeah,
Good.
I can hear you.
We don't wait another week.
Sorry?
We didn't want to wait another week.
Yeah. So why do I say it's more of a problem by the night meal? Because many of the Achronim take on that the night meal is a Torah obligation to eat, and the day meal is only a rabbinical obligation to eat. And we see this as actually a ramification in halacha. As halacha says, if a person forgets Ya'aleh v'Yavoi, he forgets to say Ya'aleh v'Yavoi in benching in Birkat Hamazon, he has to repeat benching, but he only has to repeat benching at the times, those meals that he's obligated to eat. Now, Yom Tov night, he's obligated to eat a meal. As a result, if you were to forget Birkat Hamazon, to forget Ya'aleh v'Yavoi, you'd have to repeat Birkat Hamazon. Whereas any meal that a person has on any festival that he's not obligated to eat, he wouldn't need to repeat Birkat Hamazon if he forgot Ya'aleh v'Yavoi. So some of the commentators say, how can you have a meat meal by night? If number one, how can you have a milk meal by night? Sorry, if number one, you have to have meat, and number two, the meat has to be the main meal, that the main Torah obligation to rejoice in the meal is the night meal. So all the more so that should be the one to have meat. So it's discussed backwards and forwards. In a nutshell, the answer is that many of the commentators say is that in fact you don't need to have meat. Meat, it's true in the time of the Bet HaMikdash was how they celebrated, but today meat is something that's enjoyable. And ultimately, if it's enjoyable for a person to have delicious milky delicacies, and today, I remember my wife commenting that when we lived in Israel, she said it was more expensive to make a good milky meal than to make a meaty meal. And sometimes the milky restaurants are more expensive than the meaty restaurants, right? So a good milky meal is very enjoyable for a lot of people. So at least once.
But there's more work.
Sorry?
A milky meal is to make, ask your wife, is more work than a meaty meal.
Yeah. So they say, they want to say that it's not specifically you have to have meat. You could have anything you enjoy, and on Shavuos we enjoy milk, especially considering the fact that on Shavuos there's a custom to have milk. So even the more so we're rejoicing in the fact that we can fulfill this custom, especially after we've heard my humble share, and we know the reasons for the custom, and then we can enjoy it even more as we contemplate the reasons. So that's one of the ideas that they give, that in fact, even though yes, the mitzvah is to have meat, but it's not specifically meat, it's anything that's enjoyable, and on Shavuos it's enjoyable to have milk. It also is brought down that and this is connected to what we mentioned before, that there's an idea why to have milk specifically in the night meal. So the Siach Yitzchok wants to say that the reason why we have milk in the night meal is because but he wants to say, and this is interesting because we quoted before a different idea, but it's the opposite of what the Mishnah Berurah suggested. He wants to say that before Matan Torah, before the Torah was given, they couldn't eat meat. Not that they ate meat before Matan Torah and then they just didn't know how to shech after Matan Torah. They couldn't eat meat before Matan Torah because they were aware that meat involves various halachic issues that we haven't yet learned how to do. So consequently, in the night they ate milk, and in the day they could begin to eat meat because they could learn the laws of Shechita. Now they may not have eaten meat straight away, but he says therefore the night before we receive the Torah, in other words the evening of Shavuos, it makes so much more sense to eat milk then, as if to say we've not yet got the Torah, we're going to receive the Torah in Shul again on Shavuos morning, in the morning on Shul, and then we're going to start eating meat again. So he wants to say that's an idea to eat meat. Having said that, that's one custom, to eat milk by night. There's another custom that's to eat milk in the day, and here there's various ways to do it. One way, which is very interesting, is they One way is that they make kiddush in Shabbos morning, Yom Tov morning after shul. They have a nice kiddush. They have a milky kiddush. They don't have one of the meals of Yom Tov as a milky meal. They just have kiddush as a milky meal. And after kiddush, then they go home and they have a meat meal. So that way, you don't have the problem of eating milk for one of your meals, because those commentators who say, oh, it's not so straightforward to eat a milky meal, not a meaty meal, they don't have that problem. They have a kiddush. But don't worry, there's other problems with that. And we'll see soon that one of the problems is, well, it's not such a problem, but some of the commentators aren't happy because of the necessity to bench in between the kiddush and the meal. We'll see that shortly. We'll go into that shortly. Another way people do it is during the meal. During the meal, and this gets to the into the really complicated, the nitty-gritty parts of things. During the meal, they start off with milk. They make kiddush. They have a milky buffet or a milky first course, a milky entree, and then they clear the table and go into a meaty thing. Now the question is, how do you do that? Do you have to bench? What various halachic difficulties are there, which we'll see soon? It's very interesting, and we'll go into that a bit. And then a third custom, and this is very fascinating, which is very early, brought down by a very early source, was to have meat, and then to wait an hour, and after the hour to have a milk meal. Now bear in mind that we're all familiar that there's various customs how long we wait after a meat meal. And in Holland, they wait an hour. But in the vast majority of places, people wait 6 or 3 hours. And there's good sources for both. The custom to wait an hour is brought down, we'll see, it's brought down in the Rishonim, it's brought down in the Shulchan Aruch by the Ramah, and it's got definitely a very, very strong backbone of support to rely on. But what about those people whose custom the whole year is to wait 6 hours or 3 hours? So here, the Kolboy says something interesting. This early commentator says that you don't need to wait, and no one needs to wait 6 hours. They would only wait 1 hour. Even those people who normally wait longer would wait 1 hour. Why? He says something interesting. He says, because we get up, we've stayed through the whole night sleep and learning, and then we get up in the morning, and by the time we finish davening, everyone's very hungry. So he wants to suggest that when they eat the first part of the meal, the meat, it digests much faster than usual because we're quite hungry, we're famished. We've been up all night, and we're quite we're hungry. So he suggests that the meat digests quicker than usual, and that would be enough to rely on this idea that everyone can wait an hour. Even those who normally wait 6 or 3 could wait an hour between going from meat into milk, because the food's digested faster. That's one idea. A lot of the Achronim, a lot of the later commentators say not to rely on this idea that Mishnah Berurah says that one should be stringent to keep one's custom that one normally keeps, to keep it on Shavuos as well, because there's so many nice ways to fulfill the custom without having to rely on an opinion that one doesn't normally rely on, that there's no need to do that. But ultimately, that's one suggestion. And another suggestion is to daven very early, which many people do on Shavuos. They daven at dawn, they daven at netz, at sunrise, and then to eat 2 meals in a day. They have, like on a Shabbos when you have 2-day meals, they have a sort of early to mid-morning milky breakfast. And then a few hours later, when they're ready to eat again, maybe in mid-afternoon or lunchtime, when they're ready to eat, they have a nice meaty meal again. And that way they fulfilled all the ideas. They've had a milky meal and a meaty meal. And in fact, and that's very nice, because then they eat the second meal, the meaty meal, they eat it when they're hungry, because they've re-got their appetite back, and as a result, it's very nice. There's some various customs how people do it. That last idea, one should bear in mind that there's on Erev Shabbos, which this year Shavuos, the first day of Shavuos is Erev Shabbos, there's a problem with eating, there's a specific problem with eating a full meal very close to Shabbos, from somewhere in the mid-afternoon. So as a result, if one does, the people who go with that custom have to be careful that both their meals are before that time cut-off point. In other words, that their meals are one meal early morning and one meal midday or slightly after. Okay. Now, what are the various, we said there's some various halachic problems here. And here we're going to get very technical and halachic. And then hopefully, by the end, when everyone is scratching their heads and needing a drink, then we'll end up with something nice and close off. So let's go into it. Where does let's start with the source for the Gemara that speaks about milk and meat, this problem of milk and meat. Now I'm going to show you, I'm going to put you on share screen if that's okay, and I'm going to show you a Gemara. And the Gemara is actually very interesting. There's a number of Gemaras that discuss the time period between meat and milk. Bear in mind that according to Torah law, there's 3 things one can't do with meat and milk. One can't eat meat together with milk, one can't cook meat together with milk, and one can't have benefit from meat that's been mixed with milk. Those are 3 things. There is nowhere in the Torah that says that one can't eat, and this is something that's a common misconception. There's no Torah law that forbids eating meat and milk not together. It was not, let's call it, for argument's sake, not in the same mouthful. It's not a Torah law. However, Chazal, the rabbis of the Gemara, were worried that eating meat and milk in close proximity would give a person the impression that they were eating meat together with milk. So they made a gezerah, like many of the Isurim Rabbanon, many prohibitions that are rabbinical, and they made a gezerah. They said one can't eat meat and follow it with milk. And the Gemara, in fact, there's an opinion in the Gemara that says that you couldn't eat milk followed by meat. But that's not how many of the commentators and the Shulchan Aruch ruled. So ultimately, there's a Gemara that says that you have to wait between meat and milk. Now, the Gemara says, like this, I'm going to try and put it on share screen. I'm going to try and show you. The Gemara says that, here we go. Everyone see?
Starting.
Yeah. So the Gemara says, Gufa, Omar Rav Chisda says, Ochal Bosa, one who ate meat, Osa Lechel Gavina, cannot eat cheese afterwards. Gavina, one who eats cheese, Mutter Lechel Bosa, can eat meat afterwards. Omar Rav Acha bar Yosef, Rav Chisda, so Rav Acha, the son of Yosef, said to Rav Chisda, Bosa shebein hashinayim now, what about meat between the teeth? So he answered him, we'll skip the answer. Omar Marukva says, Marukva was one of the Tanaiks, one of the Amiroim, the sages of the Gemara. And no lahom milsa, with regard to this matter, with regard to this idea of eating meat and milk, I am chala b'chama, I am like vinegar the salt of wine. Legabe avo, in relation, in proportion to my father. Well, in other words, he was criticizing himself and said, I'm not as holy as my father. I'm like vinegar, like a product of wine, but I'm not got the same taste as wine. Why? De'ilu Abba, my father, he have an ochil bisra, when he would eat meat, ha'itna, when he would eat meat today, lo yahava ochil gavina ad lamocha. He wouldn't eat cheese for 24 hours. He would eat meat and he would stop himself from eating cheese, 24 milky products, 24 hours later. The ilu anor, but I, bahar sa'udata, and these are the important words. Bahar sa'udata, in that meal, hudala achilna. If I eat meat, I won't eat milk in the same meal. This udata acharita, but in the next meal, achilna, I would eat. So the Gemara there very clearly says that he held that even though that one can't eat milk after meat, but that's only in the same meal. In the next meal, one can eat milk after eating a meat meal. Now these words, the next meal, there's a huge discussion in the Rishonim and Shulchan Aruch, what does that mean? So Tosfos, the medieval commentator on the side of the page, says, Lav bis udata sharagilin la'asos. We're not talking about the regular meals, achas shachris, once in the morning, the achas arabis, once in the evening. Bear in mind that in former days, they didn't eat 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and supper. They ate 2 meals, a morning meal and an evening meal. The morning meal before they went out to work, and the evening meal. So he says, we're not talking about those 2 meals. Elo, rather, afilu la'alta, even immediately, in sileg hashulchan, if he removes the table. Remember that in medieval times, they would have a table that they would eat on the table. They would remove the table, they would have small tables, they'd remove the table. Can everyone hear? Yeah, good. So in Silik HaShulchan, if they remove the table, or Beirach, and they made the after blessing, they made Birkat HaMazon, mutter, then it's immediately permissible to eat milk. In other words, Tosfos wants to propose that one could move the table, one could in other words, clear the food away, put on a new tablecloth, bench, make Birkat HaMazon, and then one could eat milk. That's it. That's all one needs. That's what Tosfos says. However, many of the other commentators want to suggest that between one meal and another is, like Tosfos said, it's between the morning meal and the evening meal. And the Gemara, in the times of the Gemara, it was very well known that there was approximately 6 hours between the morning meal and the evening meal. And that's basically the source for these 2 customs. One custom says 6 hours because the Gemara, when it says from one meal to the next, means from the morning meal to the evening meal, which already all the commentators say that definitely was a period of approximately 6 hours. Some people want to say that it doesn't mean 6 hours literally, but it's into the 6th hour, in other words, about 6 hours. But either way, it was a significant amount of time. While Tosfos understands that it's no amount of time, it's just dependent on having a different meal. That's it. Now, according to that, we haven't yet seen anything about 1 hour. We've just seen 6 hours or the next meal. And bear in mind, remember that when Tosfos says the next meal, he's not specifically talking about the next. He doesn't just say next meal. He says 2 conditions. He says one has to remove the table in other words, clear away. And that sort of, it shows, it's symbolic of we've ended this meal, and he has to bench. He has to make Birkat Hamazon. That's what Tosa said.
Do that often with a simcha.
Yeah.
Meaty meal, clean the table. We have one, we have 1 hour, and we bench, and then you get a milky buffet.
No, yeah. That's what we'll get to this. Yeah, we've heard this. But the interesting question is, so where does 1 hour come from? According to the opinion of Tosfos that we just saw, it's not about 1 hour. It could be even less than 1 hour. It could be 5 minutes. Clear the table, make Birkat Hamazon. If you sing it nicely, it could take, who knows, 10 minutes to sing it with all the tunes and the nice singing, and then start the next meal. Where does 1 hour come from? So actually, 1 hour, believe it or not, is a stringency. It's not a leniency. Most people think 1 hour is the lenient opinion of 6. But it's not. 1 hour is the strict opinion of Tosfos, because Tosfos says you have to remove the thing. And many of the commentators say that, well, technically speaking, there's the other opinions that say 6 hours, that say to wait. So they make this sort of peshora, they make this compromise. And those opinions say, let's compromise, give it a specific amount of time. And it's not just a made-up number, 1 hour. It has got an origin. In Kabbalistic writings, there's an origin of the concept of 1 hour. But give it a specific amount of time, clear the table, do Birkat Hamazon, bench, give it a specific amount of time, and then fair dues, we're ready to eat the milk meal. And that actually is the custom of the Dutch people. It's not a leniency on the 6 hours. It's a stringency. They're actually being strict, the Dutch people. Many people think that those who keep 1 hour are being makel, they're being lenient, but they're not. They're being strict. They're saying, really, we follow the halacha, we follow the ruling of Tosfos, that one could just simply clear the table, bench, and start again. But we're suggesting that we need an hour instead. If we make an hour, it's like a nice safety zone, a safety barrier. So that's the two opinions. And the Shulchan Aruch records both opinions. The Shulchan Aruch himself writes 6 hours, and that's the custom of the Sephardi communities. And the Ramah quotes both. The Ramah says there's those who keep 6, and there's those in Europe who kept 1, which is still the custom today in Holland. And that's the basis for the 1.
And Lithuanian community, I think they keep also at least ancient or pre-war community kept 6 hours, if I'm not mistaken. Litvaks.
Most communities in Western Europe kept 6 hours. There were some communities that kept 3, but the Dutch community, including lots of parts of Western, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that a lot of Western Germany also kept 1 hour, and that custom definitely goes back hundreds of years. Without a doubt, it's definitely hundreds years old. And we've seen that Tosfos, who was a medieval commentator who lived in France, also had that opinion, or at least he had an even more lenient opinion. He said you don't even need to wait an hour. So that's the basis for the different things. Now, all that is very nice, but that's talking about, and we've seen now that you'd need 2 things. To go from a meat meal to a milk meal, you'd have to bench, you'd have to remove the table, in other words, end the meal, wait and bench, do Birkat Hamazon, do Birkat Hamazon, and then wait an hour, and then one could start the milk meal. Now the Ramah Islis records this minhag, this halach, this custom that many people have to eat to wait an hour. In fact, says that there's he says that one would definitely have to bench, like Tosfos said. Tosfos said you have to remove the meal and bench and do Birkat Hamazon. So Ramah says there's 2 opinions brought down whether what would be the case if one is one allowed to deliberately bench in order to start a milk meal. So our honored host tonight has informed us that in Holland, the custom was that they'd have chasanas, they'd have these weddings, and for dessert, it would be very nice. Everyone would bench, they'd do the Sheva brachas, and then they'd bring in, wait a bit, maybe dance, wait an hour, and then bring in this delicious, milky, vanilla buffet with, I think they call it a Viennese buffet with milky products, and everyone could enjoy it with their coffees with real milk in.
Yeah, a good buffet.
Is the minhag not depending also a little bit on the climate? Southern Europe is different than Northern Europe. Way of digestion.
That could be. Would there be do you have a specific reason why that would be so?
Yes, I lived a long time in Italy. They have different customs than Holland.
Very interesting. It's fascinating you mention that. Many of the customs in Italy are similar to the customs in Morocco and Northern Africa, because presumably in several centuries ago, there was a lot of travel and business between Northern Africa and Italy. So you find connections between the communities in Italy and Northern Africa. But what's interesting is that the Roman communities have minhagim, have customs that they record dates millennia, perhaps even to the time of the Second Temple. Now, it's very, very ancient custom in Rome. I have a friend who recently went to Rome, and he told me that he went to the big Bet Knesset Gadol, the big shul there, and he said it was so different to anything he'd experienced in any of his shuls that he'd ever visited. He said he didn't know how to follow the services. So that's an interesting. But there could very well be differences in different customs from different places. I'm not familiar with the history of customs, but if you have anything to share, always welcome. Always welcome.
It's the second oldest community in the world.
The Roman community.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
First one was from Queen Esther. The second one was in Rome.
Very interesting. Wow. Fascinating. Okay, so the Ramah says, is this permissible? Can one deliberately bench in order to start a new meal and eat milk? Now the problem is, what's the problem with that? Because we've just seen that Tosa says two things. He says two conditions. One has to bench, but one also has to remove the table. Now why is Tosa bothered that one has to remove the table? Why doesn't he just say bench and have a new meal? What's this whole end of the meal? So the idea is that normally there's a very simple problem here. Normally, one isn't allowed, generally speaking, there's a concept of brocha she'eina tzricha, which means an unnecessary brocha. A brocha that's not necessary. A person couldn't, let's say someone's in the middle of a meal and they decide, you know what, I'm going to make birkat hamazon for no reason whatsoever, and then I'm going to start eating all over again. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start eating all over again. I'm going to wash and start again. So the halacha says, absolutely forbidden. No way. Why? Because why are you benching? It's an unnecessary bracha. It's very nice to make brachas. It's a big mitzvah to make brachas, but it's only a mitzvah to make brachas where the halacha requires someone to make a bracha. Otherwise, every time one mentions Hashem's name, God's name in the bracha, it's almost like mentioning Hashem's name in vain. So here the Ramah said, here the commentators in halacha, they say, you can't just end a meal and start a new one immediately afterwards. Then the benching is unnecessary. So that's why Tosas now has a problem. Because Tosas says that one has to end the meal, so the Ramah says, perhaps, the Ramah wants to ask, perhaps that means that one has to really want to end the meal. Not just sort of fake it and end the meal, but actually end the meal. So Ramah says, do you know what? There's two opinions. Some people say you can't end the meal. Some people say you can end the meal in order deliberately to have milk. Those who say you can't end the meal to have milk, they say because perhaps it's an unnecessary bracha, because you're really ending the meal to eat more, which is unnecessary bracha. And the Ramah says, however, the custom was to be lenient. The Ramah clearly says it, which is exactly, and I'll get to another nice idea, it's exactly what we've heard recorded in hundreds of years, perhaps in Holland, that custom was to be lenient, that one can end the meal in order to have milk afterwards. In other words, bench, it's not an unnecessary bracha. Now, it's fascinating because the custom was to bench, but not to wash again, of course, if I'm not mistaken. They just had a buffet. They had a nice mezuzah and a cake and a coffee and a buffet after the... So one of the commentators wants to suggest that the entire problem in the first place with benching and then starting a new meal immediately is only if one has a bread meal, because then the benching is completely superfluous. It's completely unnecessary. Are you benching only to have a meal straight away after, only to wash again and eat bread? But in the case, in our chasnas and our weddings here in Holland, which I've never, with my own eyes, been privileged to see this custom, but in this custom, they're not eating a new bread meal, they're benching, they're finishing the meal, they're having a little dance, and of course, when they finish the meal, they have in mind that they want to eat more milk. But they're not making, because they're going to have a nice dessert later on in the evening. They're not going to wash their hands and have it again. They're going to have coffee and cake. So according to many commentators, that's not even what the Ramah was disturbed by. The Ramah was only bothered by those who bench and immediately wash again to have a milky meal. But not by those who bench and then don't wash again to have a bread meal, but just eat milk afterwards. That wasn't a problem. So there's definitely very, very reliable sources for the custom in Holland. Now, all of that is completely or almost completely irrelevant, because we're discussing not having milk after meat, but having meat after milk. And meat after milk, we saw clearly in the words of the Gemara, is not forbidden, as we all know. One is allowed to have meat after milk. One can start with milk and have meat. There's only one exception. The Ramah says that old cheese, and the custom generally is 6-month-old cheese, very matured cheddar, which is commonly bought on the market. It's a little bit more expensive, but mature cheddar, that cheese one would have to wait. So those who wait 6 hours would wait 6 hours after that cheese. Those who wait 1 hour would wait 1 hour, each person according to his own custom. But apart from that, general milky products, cheesecake or a milky coffee, there's no concept whatsoever recorded in the halacha of waiting after having the milk meal. So it's completely not connected to what we've seen until now. However, here the question is as follows. If one doesn't have to wait, could one just literally drink the coffee and then put a fork full of meat down one's throat? Because ultimately, you've got the taste of the milk and the coffee, or eat a cream cake, a nice, vanilla slice with the cream coming out the edges that I'm sure everyone's going to enjoy this Shavuos. And then, as soon as one's finished the cheesecake, one goes and puts a nice piece of a red, hot steak that's slightly underdone in one's mouth. It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem correct. Well, of course it's wrong, because the halacha says that even if one doesn't need to wait between milk and meat. Nonetheless, one has to actually wash one's mouth out, have a drink, a sip of something, chew on something, check that one's hands are clean. Now that seems a little bit unusual for us, that one's hands are clean, but bear in mind again that today we use cutlery. And in olden days, they didn't use cutlery, so their hands would get dirty, as we said earlier on. Check one's hands are clean, and then one can eat meat without having to wait. Now, the question is, does one have to bench? So here, many of you might be thinking, well, why would one have to bench? The whole reason why Tosfos recorded the need to move the table and bench was only because really one can't eat milk in the same meal as one's already eaten meat. In other words, one starts with meat, there has to be some sort of barrier. So we said some people it's 6 hours, some people it's 1. The original custom in Tosfot was not even 1, but there's a barrier. There's a barrier in place that from meat to milk, one has to remove the table and then eat and then have the milky meal. So in order to symbolize this barrier, to make this sort of gap in between, one would remove the table, clear off, and then bench and do Birkat Hamazon. But the Mishnah Berurah says, why would one have to do that if it's the other way around? Since there's no reason whatsoever to wait, in theory, between milk and meat, when it's that way around, when it starts with milk and ends with meat, if that's the case, then why would there be any reason whatsoever, any need to bench and remove the table? All one needs to do is make sure one's hands are clean, wash one's mouth out, clear those things on the table that are milky, because we're not allowed to put milk and meat on the same table. Remove the tablecloth, because the tablecloth also, one can't have milk and meat on the same tablecloth. And then start with your meat meal. And that could be 5 minutes later, and there doesn't need to be a Birkat Hamazon. And that's what the Mishnah Berurah says. And that's the halachic opinion of many people. Many people follow that opinion, that if one has those customs that we said earlier, where one has a milky meal followed by, and in the same meal, one starts with a nice milky entree, and then one goes into a meaty meal, that meaty meal can be done in the same meal. Just have a drink, maybe have some challah, have something to chew on, check your hands are clean, remove the tablecloth, no need to bench, and start all over again with the meat. And that's absolutely fine. There are some opinions who are stringent, and those opinions want to suggest that one does need to bench. In the same way that we see that benching is a barrier from meat to milk, it's also a barrier from milk to meat. Although the Shulchan Aruch doesn't rule like that, the Ramah doesn't rule like that, but those commentators who say so, they say one has to bench. So the question on them is, if you have to bench, maybe benching is again unnecessary. Because what are you about to do? What are you benching for? You're benching to carry on eating. But we just said that benching to carry on eating, in essence, is a problem of an unnecessary benching. So in fact, those people who do bench are running into... Sorry?
It's a brocha vatola.
Brocha vatola, an unnecessary brocha. So it seems like it's one of those cases where it seems like they're coming with a chumrah, they're coming with a stringency. They're saying one has to bench. But actually, it's a stringency that seems to result in a leniency, because their benching could be an unnecessary bracha. So on that, they discuss it. They say it's not an unnecessary bracha, because why are we benching? I'm benching because I want to have meat. Why do I want to have milk and meat? Because there's a custom to have milk on Shavuos and meat on Shavuos. So I'm starting out, I can't have meat first and then milk, because then I'd have to wait an hour, 6 hours. So I'm going to very happily start off with milk. In essence, I would carry on the meal, no problem, but I've got my hands tied behind my back, because I can't eat meat as soon as I've eaten milk. So those people say it's not an unnecessary bracha. It's necessary. It will be necessary bracha in order to eat milk followed by meat. So they're not so bothered by that. So there you have two opinions. But the Mishnah Berurah, like I said, the Mishnah Berurah says that one can start off one's meal with milk, finish off, clean one's mouth out, eat bread, remove the tablecloth, and finish off with meat and have a lovely Yom meal. In fact, some people even want to challenge those who we said there's a custom to have a kiddush, to have the after shul kiddush. Be'ezrat Hashem, everyone will be well and healthy. There'll be no coronavirus left in the entire world, and we'll all be in shul this Shavuos, and we'll have a nice milky kiddush with those nice milky cakes that we haven't had in shul for so long. And when we have that milky kiddush, we'll then go home. So some people say, wait a minute, when you have your kiddush, you're also making an after bracha, you're benching, and then you're going to eat. Is that an unnecessary bracha? So and that's really a question every Shabbos. Maybe it's an unnecessary bracha. So there the answer is no, because I'm having a kiddush in shul, so I'm having my nice shul kiddush because I'm hungry after davening, and then at some stage later, I eat my suda, my Yom Tov meal. It's not an unnecessary bracha. Those who have a kiddush at home, who make kiddush, have some cake, and then make an alamicha, make the after bracha, and go on to eat their meaty meal, perhaps they're doing an unnecessary bracha. So again, one can come back to this same argument that it's not an unnecessary bracha. They're doing that bracha in order to make a separation between the two different customs. The custom to have milk, the custom to have meat, no unnecessary bracha. So that's a little bit of the throwing at you the sugya, the whole complex, challenged world of meat and milk and meat, and how various people get around things. But as I mentioned, those of us who the custom is to eat milk in the night meal, they don't have this problem because they eat milk in the night meal. And then in the day meal, they have a meaty meal, and that's fine. Or even those who have milk for all the meals, they have milk in the night meal, milk in the day meal, each person according to their own custom. I'll just end off with one short idea, and then we'll call it a night. We'll wrap it up. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says something very interesting. He says, where's this idea? What is the idea that the Torah says not to eat meat and milk? Why does the Torah say not to eat meat and milk? Now, bear in mind that the concept of eating meat and milk has no simple, rational explanation. I'll prove it to you. Because although it's true that some of the prohibitions of various foods, eating various foods, could perhaps have a rational scientific basis, albeit we may not know the scientific basis, but definitely many of the commentators say that certain forbidden foods have a certain effect even on the physical body. Maybe science hasn't yet discovered it. Some scientific research does want to say such thing, but either way, that's what they suggest. But meat and milk definitely doesn't fall into that category. How do we know? Because we mentioned that there's three problems with meat and milk. There's eating meat with milk, there's cooking meat with milk, even if one doesn't eat it, and there's benefiting from meat and milk, even if one doesn't eat it. Well, cooking meat and milk can't have a physical effect on the body, and neither can benefiting from meat and milk. Benefiting from meat and milk doesn't need to have anything to do with the body. It could be lighting a candle that's made with animal fats together with milk, for argument's sake, or butter. And that would be forbidden. That's benefiting from meat and milk. So what's the idea? So in a nutshell, it's very, very, very complex. There are Persian, it has pages and pages on it, and it's very deep. It's very deep rationalistic for how he explains it. But in a nutshell, he wants to say, and this is similar to something we mentioned earlier, that meat and milk represent two parts of an animal body. Everything on this planet that's a vegetation needs to eat, needs to survive. It needs nutrition and it needs to reproduce. Every living thing, even plants, take in nutrition and at some stage have to have a system of reproduction in order to have more, to continue that species, plants, animals, etc. The difference between an animal and a plant is that an animal has a series of muscles and blood that can be used in order to further the eating and the reproduction system. In other words, a plant stays stationary and whatever it needs is in the same spot that it is. It eats whatever is available. In other words, it takes out the sunlight and the nutrients in the soil, and it reproduces by means of the pollen and the bees and all the various ways that plants reproduce. But an animal is a bit more complex. An animal also needs nutrients. It also needs to reproduce, and it does this by using its physical body, the muscles and its sinews, and even its brain, to go about eating and reproducing. In other words, to live, to survive. Now, in an anatomical sense, the upper half of an animal's body, the brain and the muscles and the shoulder muscles and the chest muscles, are there to serve the lower half of the animal body. they're there to serve the part of the animal body that digests the food and reproduces to make more of the species. So the meat is like the shoulders and the meat, the fleshy part of the animal body, the top part, the muscles, are there to service the milk, to service the nutrient and the reproductive side of the animal body. But ultimately, an animal is just then a complicated plant. That's all it is, because it also is only using its physical body, it's only using its meat in order to benefit the nutrient and the reproduction system. It's just a complicated plant. It's just a plant that has a faculty of motion and movement to survive. Now, in essence, there's something very symbolic there, Hirsch says. The meat, when it's mixed with the milk in the animal, represents a way of life that's only there to eat and to survive and to reproduce. That's all the cow's entire essence only knows, even its brain is not complicated, not capable of complex thought, of divine thought, of religious inspiration. It's only capable of thinking, where do I next go to get food? And how am I going to reproduce? How should my body needs food? I need to reproduce for my species. That's all it's there for. So in essence, the milk and the meat in an animal together combine to just create an animal. It's like a plant. It's just a complicated plant. It's a lower life form. That's all the meat and the milk is. So Hirsch says, we humans, we're capable of one step more. We're capable, even though it's true that we need to use all our physical body to survive, for our nutrients to reproduce, but we're even capable to serve the divine, serve Hashem. So we're capable of separating, so to speak, of not making it one, that it's just one big entity, the meat and the milk are one entity. We're capable of making ourselves better than that, of striving to something much higher, to be almost like angels, to connect with the divine. So Hirsch says when we eat meat and milk, or even when we mix meat and milk, we're mixing those two parts of the animal that represent a life of simply just living and existing. The meat to serve the milk to serve the meat. It's just one combination. It's just a machine of existence. I need to exist. But it's not actually there. It's not there to do more than that. So we keep them apart. We say we are capable of living a higher essence, not just being animals, but keeping them apart. And how do we do that? With the Torah, with the mitzvahs, by living a life according to Torah and Torah inspiration. If that's the case, and it makes so much sense why we have to be even more careful with meat and milk, and why it's so interesting that we eat meat and milk on Shavuos, and we separate them. We're going to eat meat, we're going to eat milk, but we're going to separate them, because we are capable of not putting the meat and the milk symbolic elements together like an animal, but of using the Torah that we got on Shavuos to rise, to go higher, and to receive the Torah again with more inspiration, and to have a better year and a more inspired year of Torah and learning like we're doing tonight. I thank you all for listening. I thank our host for asking me to speak, and I wish you all a lovely Yom Tov and a lovely Shavuos.
Thank you, Coach Skoyer. Any questions? It was very clear what we have to eat now.
I just want to ask if I understood it correctly. So, like after eating meat, you're supposed to be cleaning up the tables, benching, and then you're allowed to eat milky meal. And after a milky meal, there is a question if you, according to some opinions, you have to bench and proceed with clean the table and proceed with milky meat. And others say you don't have to, just clean and rinse your mouth and hands and everything. So in fact, just want to mention that in the first case you have to wait also 1 hour. Wouldn't it be a solution that if you eat a milky meal and then you eat a slice of bread together with it, and then you bench, and then you clean the table, and then you eat meat? To be just sure.
Exactly. In other words, if one starts with Kiddush, then one eats hamoitzi, the bread, and then one has some milk, and then has a slice of bread, and then clears the table, then that's fantastic. That fills everything. Slice of bread, a drink, clear the table, and get on with the main course. That would be fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Till next time. De volgende shiur is van Rav Frankenhuis. Deze shiur is de Inonishma Sechover Rabbi Gershon ben Rabbi Shmuel IJzerman.
In de Verenigde Staten is het toegestaan
En iemand heeft zijn nieuws aan.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Stanton. He's gone.
Naar Frankenhuis?
Ja,
Ja, ik zie je wel, maar gooi niet.
goed zo.
Is ook wat leuk. Ik zie je wel, maar gooi je niet.
Wat zegt u?
Ik zeg, ik hoor je wel, maar ik zie je niet. Laten we zo. Oh, wat is het hem?
Ja, zie je me nu?
Nee.
Oké.
Ja, ik zie je wel. Dus ik zie je wel. Ja,
Oh, wacht eventjes.
hij staat er goed op, ja.
Ja, je bent goed.
Oké.
Ja.
Goed zo. In ieder geval, vanavond was ik al gepland om deze shiur te zeggen.
Ja, alle mensen die hebben een microfoon aan.
Ja, de microfoon.
Wacht eventjes. Ik zal ze even allemaal unmuten. Hoe doe ik dat? Oh, het is al gebeurd. Nou, behalve...
Nee, helemaal niet. Er zijn nog
Jij niet. Ja, jouw microfoon staat ook aan, meneer.
Ja, dat weet ik zeg.